started talking about masculinity and femininity. What's a woman? What's a man? And what were the roles of men and women in family, in society, and in any aspect of life? So then we had to have a conversation about gender and separating gender from sex.
Mm-hmm.
So now all of a sudden your sex doesn't dictate your gender for some reason. And then once we separated the concept of your physical sex from your gender, we had a conversation about gender has to be a societal construct. Who says men have to be XYZ? Who says women have to be XYZ? We don't have to do that. Who has to do that? We got that from religion. We got that from the patriarchy. We got that from whatever other source they wanted to name that is now irrelevant. Am I making sense?
Yeah, I think the timelines are probably a little blurred from my perspective. I do acknowledge that there were definitely different agendas that used a lot of what you're talking about in terms of sexual habits, preferences, particular ideologies. All of these things had a role to play, I think, in how we got to the place where everything is so confused in terms of gender roles. What I will say is though, I think we'd be doing a disservice to this conversation if we don't acknowledge, in the modern sense anyway, that capitalism had a significant role in shaping the questioning and redefining of what that looks like, and ultimately leading towards many of the breakdowns in terms of men and women, especially within our community. I would personally argue that that was obviously earlier, and that was laid the groundwork for what we started to see in terms of the splitting off and in terms of the necessity for people to survive. So, you know, as we get through continue on with this conversation, I'll try to go more in depth with why I think capitalism.
Now, you gonna go in depth right now? Because I want to hear it. I want to hear it because I think I know where you might be going with that.
Yeah. So, well, my starting premise, having thought about this for a minute, is that throughout most of human history, there was always a very, very, very small percentage of women who had the luxury of not working. So I think when we're even talking about this idea of roles and responsibilities and what men should be providing everything and women should just be home, not having to work or whatever, my anecdotal experience, my research, and even just looking throughout history, large chunks, I think what's happening is people are taking a very small substrata of women that were very wealthy, came from wealthy backgrounds, wealthy families, wealthy marriages. And this was something that was typically associated with upper class women during the Victorian era. And prior to that, like queens, princesses, they're taking this very small percentage of women who didn't have to work and it was looked down upon for them to work. And they're ignoring the other 95% of women that were always working to some degree. And now they might have been working in the home, they've been working in the field, they've been working in certain industries, but they were working. And when I grew up, like obviously I was young and grew up in Philly and then Jersey. When I would go to the Chinese store or a restaurant, right, to go get some Chinese food, who was at the front register and who was in the back?
The women,
Usually,
the mama, the daughters,
usually the family.
Mm-hmm.
I've seen men back there cooking. I've seen women back there. Usually a woman that was at the front desk oftentimes. And with the Hispanic community, if we remember like the stereotypes, is like a lot of the Mexican or Hispanic community, the men would often be doing a lot of hard labor jobs, especially construction. And I just vividly remember seeing a lot of their women also outside working too, and often doing a lot of cleaning type work and jobs. And when I go to Jamaican restaurants, who at the front desk taking my order and who cook? I'm seeing these families, men and women, contributing to the household and working together to build up their wealth. We as a community have, post-Reconstruction, adopted a lot of the capitalistic mindset of whatever's happening with, basically, I think, what's the best way to say it? At one point during Reconstruction, both parties were doing what we needed to do to make things work in each home. All right. Obviously, there were exceptions to the rule, but generally speaking, both men and women were working. So when we started to decide that integration was better than what maintaining and protecting our own, in terms of our own cities, our own towns, many of which got destroyed and we couldn't protect them. And many of us opted for, it would be better for me to go to their schools, to get their degrees, to try to work within their systems. And we left the system that we had that accounted for making sure our men and our women were okay, our community. So when we started to push for integration, and the two things that I'm thinking about is integration and World War II. When World War II happened and all these men were out of the workforce, how did things continue to happen? Women en masse went to a lot of jobs that historically they weren't allowed to get access to, especially in factories. So as the women started working and they're like making money, doing it. And then what happens is these men come back. Two things happen. Integration happened, and a lot of the jobs got outsourced and sent out of the country simultaneously. So when these men came back and these women were able to start to integrate into different aspects of society that either they weren't allowed to because they were women or because they were Black, and they're now able to enter into those spaces and get access to those things at the same time that they're men, because of the government, because of the cost of living, because of things getting outsourced in terms of jobs that were easily available before he could have 6, 7, 8 kids like many of our grandparents did off of one income. As those things started to happen, the questioning and moving and shaping of our roles and what's our place in these households started to shift as well. So then when these men lost jobs and couldn't stay or couldn't provide, and these women could, and simultaneously the government was also saying, hey, we will help, but we're going to send somebody at the house to make sure we're not supporting a home that has an able-bodied man in the house. You could start to see what this was starting to do. It wasn't like these women were just leaving and saying, well, I'm going to go marry my white man. I'm going to go marry an Asian man. They were still staying loyal to Black men, generally speaking. But simultaneously, many of the men was not able to find work, not able to provide. There was incentives to keep them from being in the home. And there would be penalties to women that needed the household income and the additional supplemental support from said government. These are the seeds to me that started to lead to what we started to see later on. So when you have decade after decade of women functionally making their own money, being able to leave relationships for all types of reasons, some for abuse, some for neglect, some for cheating, you name it, regardless of the reason, you're starting to see, and at the same time, their white male counterparts was getting access to GI Bills. They were getting grants. They were getting loans, while their Black male counterparts were often not. And they were giving jobs to their women. To me, it seems clear as day that was what it was leading. It was leading towards an environment where male leadership was starting to be questioned, undermined, and not seen as essential, needed, or necessary. So it primed the community, particularly the women's side, to be more open and accepting of all this redefinition of some of these things, because the necessity of having to depend on a man was no longer there. Okay. So when they start planting all these other additional agendas, people, to me, it almost makes sense, where if male leadership is no longer in the picture and we're now functionally, culturally starting to move like we're matriarchy, it kind of adds up, where it's like, well, if we can control the women and the men aren't relevant anymore, we can kind of shape this culture to do anything, this community to do anything. So regardless of all the additional, people can point to the questioning and redefining of separation of sex and gender. They can point to certain sexual ideological viewpoints. They can point to the 4B movement. They can point to all these different things. My suggestion is that capitalism in and of itself is a system that over time is going to eat in on itself, and there's always going to be casualties. It just so happened that typically people, I think, in their head would think, well, if capitalism is going to hit people hard, who's it going to hit hard first? The jobs that the jobs in the past, it was the jobs that were easily able to be shipped and outsourced versus the jobs that were kind of stuck here. And then now in 2025 and beyond, we're going to see the next iteration of this. What's going to happen now, and I think I could be wrong, it could lead us in a direction where all those comfortable jobs where you got your AC and you're going to your office job and the government jobs, when those jobs start to get replaced with AI in the same way in which they were getting replaced in the past, where the men were the expendable commodity in the capitalist system. Now, which leading demographic over the last 9 months has lost more jobs than anybody else? Black women, most of which had those government jobs. So if this trend continues, I could see a scenario where the very same block that was saying men aren't needed and we don't want men, we don't need men, are going to have to reevaluate those talking points. So for me, I think that the economic system had a huge role to play in starting to put this divide in there.